Harrow. The trip to Sylvain's capital, Hisofe, proved more exhausting than Harrow had remembered. The majority of Sylvain's unprotected climate ranged from hot savanna to boiling desert. Along the arid isle, he resupplied his food stores with wild figs and other fruits from occasional oases each time he found a lush patch of vegetation surrounding fresh water. As a farmer, Harrow's body was sturdy, but he rarely traveled outside his town's temperate weather barrier. He was a fast runner as well, but the heat of the two suns exhausted him. If the journey is this strenuous, Harrow thought, then perhaps I was fed upon after all. But he still hadn't found bite marks on himself. Despite enduring periods of severe dehydration, Harrow eventually reached Sylvain's capital to await an audience with Low King Tanzanite in the mosaic castle. Lofty sandstone columns and a honeycombed vaulting archway marked the entrance. Dozens of bulbous towers protruded out of the center, and stained glass windows decorated the upper levels. It was refreshingly cool within Hisofe's vicinity, but nothing grew in the lands outside of the castle. Instead, lines of market stalls greeted newcomers. Harrow hadn't time to browse the wares. He passed between the castle's columns and drank from one of the countless fountains inside the open, shaded area. After filling his leather water skin, he glanced around, intimidated by the crowds of unfamiliar faces. Never before had he sought an audience with his Low King, so he hadn't known how. For a moment, he watched the people around him. After completing the longest leg of his journey, he could not return without seeking aid. Unfortunately for him, that meant approaching someone to ask for their assistance. Each time he built up the nerve to approach someone, they strode away before he had the chance. To avoid social interaction, he meandered around the entryway to the castle's interior, hoping someone else voiced their intention to speak with the king. When a pair of Rhysogli casually strolled past him, Harrow flinched. He stared up at their monstrous forms in horror. Their long, back-bent legs raised them taller than his fellow man by several heads. Their fleshy joints, armored limbs, and bulging black eyes reminded Harrow of humanoid cicadas. They sheathed their fangs, and their claws splayed in precise gestures throughout their discussion, but Harrow still found the civilized Rhysogli petrifying. The flash of terror boosted Harrow's resolve. This is foolish. Mother's life had been at risk, and I'm wasting time. Out of annoyance with himself, he asked the nearest guard about seeking the king's audience.
Go ask that, Vizier. She's handling those administrative responsibilities today.
The guard pointed to a finely dressed woman. Harrow alerted the vizier about his interest in presenting his case to the king. King Tanzanite's vizier seated him on velvet-cushioned benches in a waiting area outside of the court's main chamber. Anxiously, Harrow rubbed his hands back and forth, but he knew he couldn't do anything else. It was a relief to relax after racing for the capital. Thirst occasionally caught up to him, and he was grateful to have his leather sack full again. Others waited ahead of Harrow. More trickled in, and the viziers called each person according to the order they arrived. A woman, who had been periodically sighing, turned to Harrow. "Do you know why I'm here?" "How would I know?" Harrow thought. Harrow shook his head. She readjusted her white headscarf. "I'm here to report sacrilege." "What's been said?"
"Piety, my village's priest, preaches demon worship, and I believe he has encouraged mages across the land to study its dark magic. We fear for the fate of the kingdom, and the realm at large."
Harrow shivered at the thought of the forbidden practices. "How do you know?"
"A house collapsed the other week. Then a few days ago, there was a sandstorm."
"That's not so unusual."
"The sand ate stone and melted glass. Our village's alchemist could do nothing to reverse the effects. I believe the demoness made the sand acidic with magic. I rushed here as soon as I saw it. I can't allow this to go on any longer without the king knowing."
A dark warlock would be dangerous business. How many other horrific events have occurred in the kingdom that we never hear about? It must be a difficult thing to be king and solve every problem.
"Harrow,"
the king's vizier called.
"Good luck with the priest,"
Harrow wished the woman before approaching the overseer. "Follow me," the vizier instructed. "And clean out your nose. You are about to appear before the Low King." Self-consciously, Harrow cleared the crusted mucus wedge with his thumb and tried to ignore it as it fell and sullied the pristine tile. Led into court, flanked by a guard, Harrow's uneasiness returned, and he felt daunted to speak to Sylvain's Low King. The throne room reeked of wealth and supremacy. The ceiling stretched so far above his head that he could not see the end of the enormous columns. Spiraling support pillars were thicker than his whole body. Up close, the glass windows were comical how large they were. He had no idea how it was even possible to construct such massive panels. It must have been with the aid of architectural magic. Considering the proportions of the room and its features, he felt like he must have shrunken to the size of a shrew. The mosaic pattern of the fountains also coated the floors and ran along the walls to depict great achievements of past kings and archangels. On the wall behind the thrones, a magnificent scene of the first archangel, Basil, framed King Tanzanite. Bombarding Harrow's senses with its exquisite grandeur, the court was glorious yet distracting. While taking in the sight, Harrow periodically bumped into the vizier, until they arrived before the low king and queen consort sitting in gem-infused thrones. They whispered between themselves solemnly. Will they find my news of importance, or yet another problem that their gem and coin will need to solve? Harrow thought. The canvas portraits hung in Fagori's chief's office, but up close Harrow realized the images hadn't captured their likenesses well. However, their symbolic tangerine-colored garments served to plainly identify them as the rulers of Sovane, as easily as their crowns and thrones had. Approach closer. What have you to say? Low King Tanzanite instructed. His tone was even, his eyes curious, despite being bloodshot. Harrow honored the royalty with a standard gesture of raising his hand to his forehead, then bringing his hand down toward them with a slight bow of his head. Following custom, when he spoke, he stared at the feet of the thrones. My name is Harrow of Fagori, your majesty. My town has been attacked. I came as fast as I could to tell you, but I worry about the current condition of my village. We are not a large one, and I fear that these attacks will prove fatal to every person in my village, including my mother, who is a spawn. He tried to speak with confidence throughout his plea, but he feared he sounded like a whining child. I can spare a soldier or two to protect your village, the king declared, should that dissuade the attackers from further action. Maybe. This is the first time it has happened, and we don't know how many there were. We captured one, but it escaped, so there must have been more than one. I'll spare 2 soldiers. If there's nothing else, then I will see the next person on the list. Can you send 2 that are knowledgeable about fighting Raisaglai? Harrow implored. The word Raisaglai caught everyone's attention within the court. The attackers were Raisaglai? King Tanzanite questioned immediately. Disquiet supplanted the grief on his face. Yes, Harrow answered, struggling to keep his eyes trained downward. At least 100 people were fed upon. The Low King contemplated the new information for so long that Harrow deliberated if he should be doing something during the wait. Harrow broke with polite custom to glance at Low Queen Melite, and she smiled at him. I do not want to make any hasty movements, the Low King announced. If this is a singular occurrence, I do not wish to deplete our soldiers elsewhere and risk the well-being of the entire kingdom. However, I am troubled that they attacked a spawn. I will send 10 guards to Fagori for a full cycle of the moons. I trust that another attack will not occur again, but if it does, then I will keep the 10 stationed there and send reinforcements. While Harrow was pleased that his concerns were acknowledged, he still feared that the small grouping of soldiers would not suffice. Before Harrow could offer his opinion or give his thanks, his king's administrator ushered him away.